The boy was born and raised in a poor family. His parents worked hard all year round. The boy also had an older brother named Drew. His parents were farmers. They didn't have much land. The crops were produced with great difficulty, but the yield was not much. They could barely afford 3 meals a day for a family of 4. To cover other expenses and send their children to school, the boy's parents had to work for others to earn money, especially Mr. Nick, the boy's father. He would do anything anyone hired him to do, even building houses and carrying bricks. As long as he could earn money, he would not hesitate to work hard. Mr. Nick always encouraged his 2 children to study hard so that they could escape poverty and not suffer. Starving for a few days won't kill you, but not having an education will eventually lead to poverty for the rest of your life. Loving his parents, the boy was very obedient, studious, and obedient. Since he was a child, his parents went to work, and he came home from school to cook and do the laundry. When he was in 6th grade, he went to the fields to help his parents. In his free time, he would go fishing and selling crabs at the market, or receiving goods from the factory to do handicrafts. Any money he earned would be brought back to his parents. Children growing up in poor families always have to mature earlier than other children of the same age, and so did the boy. In contrast to his younger sister, Drew, the boy's older brother, was a lazy man who spent all day playing around. He came from a poor family, but never even washed his own clothes. Drew only studied until 9th grade and then dropped out to work as a construction worker. He spent all his money on gambling. Not only did he not help his family at all, but when he ran out of money, he also went home and took money from his mother, Mrs. Cam. Mr. Nick was very disappointed when he saw his son degenerate and not interested in working. At home, father and son would quarrel almost every time they met. Mr. Nick always used a whip to discipline Drew, but was stopped by Mrs. Cam. Living in the same house as his biological son, Mrs. Cam always gave more of her love to Drew. Ever since he became conscious, the young man could feel that, and whenever there was anything delicious, Mrs. Cam would secretly give it all to Drew to eat. Every Tet holiday, Mrs. Cam would take Drew to the market to buy a new set of clothes, but the young man would not. It took 2 or 3 years for the young man to buy a new set of clothes, and Mr. Nick had to scold his wife before his daughter could have new clothes to wear. Mr. Nick and Mrs. Cam have argued about this issue many times, treating their 2 children unfairly. Every time Mrs. Cam says, "Oh, old man, why do you worry so much about Maya? Girls are other people's children. When Maya grows up, she will get married off. Drew will take care of the family's incense. No one has come here yet. I love her more, so what's wrong with that?" Mr. Nick, of course, does not agree with his wife. He retorts to her, "You can't say that. Every child is a child. Maya is obedient, studies well, and is good at everything. The future of this poor family may depend on her. Go and look at your precious son. He is a troublemaker and a bum. He is already like this at such a young age. What good can he do for life? I'm telling you, Maya, if you are old and weak and fall, Drew will not take care of you. When the time comes, Maya will have to take care of everything by herself." The couple went back and forth, and there were only so many sentences. When he was young and didn't know anything, he felt sad and hurt when he saw his mother loving his brother more than him. But gradually, he got used to it. It was obvious that his mother loved his brother, and he kept all his resentment to himself, never making a fuss or arguing. The idea was ingrained in his blood, so it was useless to say anything. Drew dropped out of school, but he studied very well, studying all by himself. One day after graduating from grade 12, he unexpectedly passed the entrance exam to a university in the city. In the whole village, there were only 2 people who passed the university entrance exam. One was the son of the richest family in the village. The other was him. When he heard that his daughter had passed the university entrance exam, Mr. Nick was very proud. He spent all day working to show off his daughter's talent to the villagers, happier than winning the lottery. Meanwhile, Mrs. Cam was extremely indifferent and superficial, not even opening her mouth to praise her daughter. Even Drew, when he heard that his sister had passed the university entrance exam, curled his lips in disdain, and when he saw the young man, he mocked him. How terrible! A poor family suddenly passed the university entrance exam. Why don't you go to work? Maybe you'll be rich, you're educated, but you're quite a joke. Hearing the vulgar words coming from his brother's mouth, the young man did not feel angry or protest, because that kind of uneducated hooligan was just that. That afternoon, Mr. Nick happily went to the market to buy a kilo of pork and 2 big fish to cook dinner to celebrate his daughter's university entrance exam. Normally, the meals in the house were very simple. Every day, there was only a plate of boiled mixed vegetables and a plate of salted braised fish. But now, looking at the full plate of meat and fish, it was enough to understand how proud Mr. Nick was of his daughter. This would probably be the happiest day in his miserable life. After dinner, Mr. Nick called everyone in the house and announced, "Maya passed the university entrance exam. This family is blessed with a daughter who has been poor farmers for generations. Finally, the hardship has paid off. I have decided to sell part of the rice field to send Maya to the city to study." As soon as Mr. Nick mentioned selling the field, Mrs. Cam jumped up. "What nonsense is he talking about? Is she crazy? After selling the field, what will this family have to eat? They don't even have enough money to send her to college. They have to feed her for 4 years, not 4 days. So they can't rely on her. Wait until she gets married. She might bring all the money back to support her husband's family. Oh well, she doesn't have to study at university. Why should a girl study so much? Just graduate from grade 12 and then go back to work in the fields, and that's it." Drew was just waiting for that. He added fuel to the fire. "Mum is right. What education is there for her? She might go to the city and get pregnant out of wedlock. Then she'll die. As for Maya, she didn't say a word from beginning to end, because she had already predicted that this day would come. That's why, when she heard that she had passed the university entrance exam, Maya didn't know whether to be happy or sad. Of course, Maya longed to go to school, but she was aware of her family's circumstances, so she didn't dare ask for anything more. Meanwhile, the argument between Mr. Nick, Mrs. Cam and Drew reached a dead end. In the end, no matter what Mrs. Cam and her daughter said, Mr. Nick ignored it all, because Mrs. Cam and Drew were shallow-minded and could only see the immediate loss, while Mr. Nick had a long-term vision for future generations. He was determined to send his daughter to college, not so that Maya would have to work hard to support the whole family, but because he wanted to leave a blessing for his descendants, so that they would not have to live a life of hardship like him. No matter what, Mr. Nick is still the head of the family. His words are determined, and no one can stop him. Said and done, Mr. Nick immediately put the field up for sale. Very quickly, there was a buyer. Mrs. Cam and her daughter tried their best to hold on, but could not stop Mr. Nick. So they turned to vent their anger on Maya, especially Mrs. Cam. Every time she saw her daughter's face, she would scold and curse. "Just looking at your face makes me so angry. It must be because you sweet-talked him that he sold all the fields like that. It's all your fault, you evil thing. If I had known, I would have drowned your mother." Maya was very sad and heartbroken, but still tried to endure because the land had been sold. The money was in hand. Going to the city to study at university was only a matter of time. The future was wide open. As long as Maya took this opportunity, she would not let her father down and prove to her mother that she was wrong. However, 2 weeks before the start of school, an unfortunate incident occurred. Mr. Nick followed a group of workers to build a house for someone and unfortunately fell off the scaffolding. The accident left Mr. Nick paralyzed from the waist down and unable to move. The money he had saved from selling the land had to be used to pay for Mr. Nick's medical treatment. After Mr. Nick fell, Maya's chance of going to college was also out of reach. Mr. Nick was the main breadwinner in the family. Now that he was unable to work, the already poor family became even more miserable. Mrs. Cam didn't know where she heard about the story of going to Japan to work. and earning hundreds of millions a month, so she sweetly advised Maya, "Maya, our family situation is difficult, you see. Why don't you go to Japan to work? You can earn a lot of money there. Your parents are old and will only be able to rely on you in the future. If you love your mother, then listen to her." Maya at that time lost her direction and didn't know what to do. In her hometown, she could only farm to make a living, so at that time, Maya followed her mother's wishes. When she first arrived in Japan, in a foreign land, without friends or relatives, Maya suffered all kinds of hardships and was even deceived by her own countrymen. At first, Maya felt sorry and called her mother to tell her, so she wouldn't feel so alone. But all Maya received in return was the sentence, "What do you have to do for people to treat you like that?" From then on, Maya endured everything she went through on her own. Every month, Mrs. Kam only proactively contacted her daughter to remind her to send money back home to pay off the 150 million debt that she had borrowed to send Maya to Japan. She did not even ask about her daughter's health. Maya struggled to survive in a foreign country, saving every penny. About a year later, she was able to pay off all 150 million. She thought her burden had been lightened, but no. Drew in her hometown gathered to gamble and lost 500 million VND on football betting. Gangsters came to her house to collect the debt, threatened Mrs. Kam, beat her, and threatened to kill her. Drew was afraid that her beloved son would lose his life, so Mrs. Kam called her daughter and cried bitterly, begging her. Of course, Maya did not help because only Maya knew how hard it was to earn money, and whoever did it had to bear it. There was no way in the world that a brother would be in debt and a sister would have to pay for him. But who would have thought that Mrs. Kam would turn around and threaten to commit suicide with Mr. Nick? Maya felt sorry for her parents, so she had to grit her teeth and nod to shorten the time to pay off the debt. Maya worked hard to do 2 or 3 jobs at once. When she woke up at 6 a.m., Maya would bury her head in work until 9 to 10 p.m. every day. All the money she earned was sent back to her hometown to pay off Drew's debt. But it wasn't just 500 million VND, there was also the exorbitant monthly interest. It took 2 years to pay off Drew's debt. So, in the first 3 years in Japan, all the money she earned was sent back home to pay off her debt. That's why Maya didn't have money to go home for Tet for 3 consecutive years. It wasn't until the 4th year that Maya had enough money to go home for Tet. Seeing Maya return, Mr. Nick was the happiest person. He loved his disadvantaged daughter very much. At that time, land prices were rising, so Mr. Nick promised to give Maya a plot of land of 130 square meters. As for the old house she was living in, although it was dilapidated, the land area was nearly 200 square meters. He left it to Drew for future incense offerings. Mrs. Kam at that time accepted her husband's wishes, and Drew didn't interfere. That was the first time in Maya's life that she felt family affection. After returning to Japan, Maya continued to work hard to earn money, with the hope that after returning home, she would build a house on the land her father gave her. At this time, Maya met and fell in love with Tony. Luckily, Tony was from the same hometown as Maya, and their houses were only 12 kilometers apart. Tony was 5 years older than Maya and was a kind and responsible man. After getting to know each other, Tony and Maya decided to open a shop selling genuine Japanese cosmetics to Vietnamese people. God was kind to them, so they both did very well. After 3 years together, Tony proposed to Maya, and the two decided to return home to get married and then live in Vietnam. Everything went smoothly as planned. After getting married, the couple thought about building their own house. At that time, Tony and Maya had saved up some money and planned to build a house on the 130 square meter plot of land that Maya's parents had promised to Maya before. This land was under the names of Mr. Nick and Mrs. Claire, so both of them had to sign at the same time to transfer the land. However, during this period, Mr. Nick's illness became worse. Before hearing her daughter mention the land transfer to build a house, Mrs. Claire said, "Yes, The land your parents promised you is yours, but now your father's health is too poor. I'm afraid I can't take him far away. Not to mention the land papers are time-consuming and complicated, going back and forth all the time. How can he stand it? Well, now you two should build a house first. Wait until your father's health improves a bit, then I'll take him to do the paperwork later. Claire said it made sense, so Maya and her husband spent nearly $1 billion to build a new, spacious house with expensive furniture and 3 bedrooms on 1 floor. During the construction phase of the new house, all the neighbors were amazed. This was also the period when the family's relationship was the most harmonious ever. Maya thought her life had changed, but unexpectedly, a storm arose. The new house had only been built for a month when Mr. Nick had a stroke and passed away. The whole family was in pain, especially Mrs. Claire. After her husband's funeral, she fell ill. Maya felt sorry for her mother, so she took Mrs. Claire into her home to take care of her. Drew took the opportunity to join her to help take care of her mother. Maya did not suspect anything. A year later, the pain of losing a loved one had long subsided, but Claire and Drew were still living together in Tony and Maya's house. Claire didn't say anything because she was the elder, and Drew was a man, but for some reason, he was always hanging around and not working. Not only did he have nothing to do, but also acted like the owner of the house. Tony felt that something was wrong, so he discussed with his wife to choose his words carefully so that Drew could return to the old house to live so that his mother-in-law could stay and take care of him. But when the couple expressed their wishes, Drew was stubborn and refused to move out, saying that the old house was dilapidated and uninhabitable. Claire also covered for him, saying, "The house is so big. How can the 2 of you live there? Let your son stay there temporarily. Anyway, he doesn't have a wife or children." Although Maya and her husband were upset, they didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so they tried to ignore it. 2 or 3 months later, Drew suddenly brought his girlfriend home to ask for a wedding because she was pregnant. Maya and her husband were secretly happy because after the wedding, Drew no longer had a reason to stay with them. During this period, Maya also found out that she was pregnant. After Drew got married, Tony and Maya once again asked Drew and his wife to move back to their old house. But Drew was stubborn and refused to go. Claire kept defending him. In the end, they argued and didn't look at each other. At this moment, Mrs. Claire turned her face and said to Tony and Maya, "You two are selfish enough. If that's the case, don't even think about me giving you this land. If you want to take the land, you have to meet 3 conditions. 1 is to let Drew and his wife live together. 2 is to support me until I die, and at the same time, give Drew $5 million every month. And 3 is not to sell the land." After hearing Claire's request, Maya and her husband were shocked. Life is truly unfair. Anything can happen. Maya covered her face with all the resentment she had accumulated since childhood and burst into tears. As Maya's husband, Tony understood how miserable Maya was, so he hugged his wife and left the house he had built. The house was abandoned, and their family relationship was also thrown away. The couple moved all their belongings and moved out to rent a house. Drew was extremely happy when he saw that, suddenly having a nice house to live in. Things went on like that. Tony and Maya had good luck in business, so their cosmetics business grew more and more prosperous, blooming several times when they were in Japan. A few years later, the 2 of them bought land and rebuilt a new house that was even more spacious and beautiful than the old one. At the same time, Maya was pregnant with her 2nd child. The first was a boy, and the second was a girl. Family life was very happy, until one day, Mrs. Claire and Drew shamelessly came to the house. The thing is, Drew had bet on football and owed someone nearly $2 billion. Drew's wife could not accept an irresponsible husband who had turned into a gambler like Drew, plus her mother-in-law, who was always nagging her son, so she signed the divorce papers, took her son back to her mother's house, and cut off all ties. Mrs. Claire sold the old house, just enough to pay the principal, and could not manage the 300 million interest. Knowing that her daughter had been doing well in business for the past few years, she begged the poor and the needy to borrow money from her daughter to pay off her son's debt. The love between Maya and her children had cooled down. Only Tony stood up and said no to lend them money, and then chased Claire and her children out of the house. Claire was so angry that she went home and badmouthed her ungrateful daughter everywhere. But everyone in the village knew that Claire had treated her daughter badly, so no one cared. Being chased away like that was still light. It served her and her children right. After that day, Claire and her children still came to bother them a few more times, but were chased away by Tony. Perhaps because of the humiliation, they never showed up again. Until the 7th month of pregnancy, Maya suddenly got a strange disease. One morning when she woke up, Maya found that her eyes were bulging more than usual, as if she had been crying. At first, Maya didn't pay much attention, but after only a week, Maya's eyes were swollen like 2 rice bowls. The edges of her eyes were bruised and painful. Maya could only open her eyes slightly to look. Tony took his wife to the doctor, and the doctor said she had an inflammation of the lacrimal gland. But Maya was pregnant and couldn't take medicine, so she had to endure it. Tony regularly cleaned his wife's eyes with saline solution, as prescribed by the doctor, but it didn't work. Every day or two, it would get better, and then they would swell up again. One illness had not yet ended when another one came. A short time later, Maya got chickenpox. Chickenpox is very dangerous for pregnant women. There is a risk of miscarriage. The couple was very worried. Maya had to be hospitalized for treatment so that the doctor could monitor her. At first, Maya only had a few small blisters, but gradually they spread all over her body. Wherever the blisters burst, Maya's skin became ulcerated. Maya could not heal on her own. Pus and blood flowed all over the hospital bed sheets. The nurses had to change the sheets 2 or 3 times a day. Even the doctor said he had never seen anyone with chickenpox as bad as Maya. The chickenpox rash on her scalp caused Maya's hair to fall out by 1/3. Tony had to shave off his wife's rash to facilitate treatment. Not sure if it was the chickenpox affecting the baby in her womb, but after midnight, Maya would have stomach pains, not like the baby was kicking her, but like someone was kicking her in the stomach. In the morning, Maya's lower body was bleeding. A month after being hospitalized, Maya had a miscarriage. The baby was stillborn. Because the fetus was too big, 8 months, a cesarean section was required to remove it. When the baby was returned to the family, Tony was so shocked that he burst into tears. The baby was black and blue, with both eyes open, not closed like a normal baby, and blood was flowing out of its ears and mouth. Afraid that his wife could not bear the shock, Tony hid it from Maya and brought the baby home for a proper burial. Being tortured by illness and the pain of losing her child made Maya completely collapse. She stopped eating and drinking and had no desire for anything. Every night Maya cried for her child. She was 8 months pregnant, but in the end, mother and child were separated. At the same time, her business was also not going well during this period. She encountered all kinds of unexpected problems, and her competitors stole her customers. As for Claire, she was nowhere to be seen, and she did not even bother to contact and ask about her daughter, even worse than a complete stranger. Maya was hospitalized for 3 months. The sores on her body not only did not improve, but also became more severe. The infection spread to almost all over her body. Maya's eyes were so swollen that she could no longer open them. The doctor could not find the reason why Maya's illness had become so serious, while chickenpox was not a serious illness. Staying in the hospital could not cure her, so Tony asked for his wife to be discharged to switch to traditional medicine. Tony asked around. People only told him to bathe in this and that leaves, take this and that medicine, but all were in vain. As time went on, Maya's legs became increasingly shriveled, leaving only skin and bones, and Maya could no longer walk on her own. Tony had to carry her wherever she went. At that time, Tony did not think about spirituality at all, because he had never had any relatives in Tony's family come to visit his daughter-in-law. They thought Maya's condition was strange. It was just chickenpox. Why did she end up like this? Tony's mother advised her son to take her daughter-in-law to see a shaman to see if she had violated the underworld and was being scolded by a hidden person. At that time, Tony just listened to it and did not take it to heart, as if someone had made his mind go blank and his thoughts were not clear. As time passed, Maya's health deteriorated to the point where she realized she was about to die. All 4 limbs were numb, and the illness tortured her to the point that life was worse than death. Maya was already small, weighing only 50 kilos. After the illness, she was left with only skin and bones and weighed more than 30 kilos. Her eyes were so swollen that her face was deformed. Even though she was in such a bad condition, the doctor only diagnosed her with a normal inflammation, which was due to Maya's poor constitution, causing her to swell more than usual. Maya's skin was patchy, peeling off in some places, and scaly in others. In general, anyone who hadn't seen her for a long time would not be able to recognize her as Maya. Until one day, Tony had just gone to the market to buy meat to cook porridge for his wife. Suddenly, a strange woman, who looked to be in her 50s, came from somewhere and patted Tony on the shoulder and said, "Someone in your family had an accident, got a strange disease, and was sick all the time, and your business was ruined, right?" Hearing this woman's question, Tony was startled and thought to himself, "Who is this strange woman? How does she know about our family?" Feeling strange, Tony asked, "Yes, that's right. But how did you know about my family? It seems like you and I don't know each other." The woman just smiled and said, "Yes, that's right. I just happened to pass by you, and the old man who was paralyzed in both legs called me here to meet you. While I'm here, I'll tell you that your family is hated by people. They want to curse you, and I saw ghosts following you." After hearing what this woman said, it was as if Tony woke up. Suddenly remembering about going to see a fortune teller, he should have gone a long time ago. Tony hurriedly asked, "Miss, are you a fortune teller? Please help me. My wife at home is very sick." The woman smiled and nodded. She told Tony to take her home to see how things were. At that time, Tony ignored the scam. Who knows, maybe he will meet a noble person. On the way home, Tony and this woman talked back and forth. She introduced herself as Lana. Her family sold agarwood near the market. When she arrived at Tony's house and saw Maya, Mrs. Lana was shocked and shouted, "Oh my God, it's so serious. This is going to kill you. How many months has my wife had this disease?" Tony quickly replied, "Yes, it's been almost 4 months. Is there any way to save my wife? I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life." Mrs. Lana said that Maya's condition was too serious for her to bear, but her husband could save her. The next day, Mrs. Lana took her husband to Tony's house. That day, Tony's parents were also there. Mrs. Lana's husband's name was Hai. Later, Tony learned that Mr. Mason was a very famous exorcist. He would help those who were destined to come to him. Those who were not destined to come to him would refuse. I heard that he even had a superior following him to protect his life. Mr. Mason only glanced at Maya and then went into every room in the house, opening every window. Then he said he would save Maya, but the curse was still inside. Now he had to find it to remove it completely, unlike other shamans. Mr. Mason did not set up any altar, but only brought along a black dove and a white dog with a pink nose. He took out 2 talismans from his person, tied one to the dove's leg and let it fly into the sky, tied the other to the dog's collar and shouted, "Go find it for me." As soon as he heard the command, the white dog started to go around the house, sniffing around as if it was searching for something, while the black pigeon released it into the sky, but it did not fly away. It just circled around the roof. About an hour later, the pigeon landed on the ground. It picked up a small black plastic ball the size of a ping-pong ball. At this time, everyone looked and saw it perch on the roof for a while before picking up the plastic ball, so it must have found it there. The dog also found a black plastic ball under the bed in Maya and Tony's bedroom. Mr. Mason did not let anyone touch it. He took it out himself. The plastic ball that the pigeon found had a bunch of hair rolled up into the shape of a puppet, very small in size, only the size of 2 finger joints, and a rusty razor blade was tied to the body of the puppet. When the dog found the plastic ball, there was a bloody amulet inside. Mr. Mason said this blood was the dirty blood of menstruating women. The ghost not only wanted Maya to die, but also wanted the family to go bankrupt, so he sent his soldiers to destroy Tony's business. Seeing Mr. Mason remove the spell, Tony's whole family got goosebumps, because these spells had been in the house for months, and no one knew. Once the spell was found, everything would be easy to solve. Mr. Mason told them that there was no need to give Maya any medicine. They just had to run to the sea to scoop up seawater to bathe Maya when the rooster crowed. Then the wound on her body would slowly heal. This time it would definitely be cured. In addition, if the family wanted to know who cast the spell, he would have a way to make that person come and beg for forgiveness. Whenever the family felt sorry and wanted to forgive the evil person, they could come to him and he would help. Mr. Mason also added that the person who harmed Maya was someone very close to the family. Hearing that, Tony thought of the pain of losing his 8-month-old child, plus the suffering his wife had endured for so long, and decided to make the bad guy pay. Not knowing what Mr. Mason had done, he only saw him take everything the dog and pigeon had found and leave. Tony offered Mrs. Lana and Mr. Mason 20 million as a reward, but the two refused to accept it. Mrs. Lana said that someone had entrusted her and her husband to come here as a way to save people and gain merit. It was true that if you do good deeds, you will have noble people to help you when you are in trouble. Following his instructions, every day at 3 a.m., Tony ran to scoop up seawater to bathe his wife, because Mr. Mason had told him to use clean seawater every day, not to store the water. After only a week of persistently bathing in seawater, the sores on Maya's body had all dried up, and her eyes had also shrunk by half, and she could now open them. However, Maya was still too weak to walk. About a month and a half later, when Maya's health had recovered 70%, Claire suddenly brought Drew to ask for help. Only then did it become clear that the one who had cast a spell on Maya was Drew. It was true that when the house is on fire, the rats will show their true colors. Looking at Drew now, he was as miserable as Maya before. Whatever Maya suffered, Drew suffered the same, even worse. Claire had to ask someone to put Drew on a stretcher and carry him to Maya's house. Claire cried and begged and admitted that Drew had harmed Maya. Claire did not know about this until Drew was beaten back. She went to a shaman and found out. The shaman on the other side said that only the victim could be saved. Otherwise, they would just wait to die. The reason Drew cast a spell on his sister and her husband was because he was jealous that his sister had a good life and resented the fact that Tony did not lend him money and kicked him and his mother out into the street, making him embarrassed in front of the neighbors. Of course, Tony would not forgive. Who would tolerate harming someone else's child to the point of death? Grandma Maya just kept silent from beginning to end, letting her husband decide. Blood ties and family ties had completely dried up. Maya herself hated Drew. But then Mrs. Clare knelt down and said to Maya, "Maya, I'm kneeling down and begging you. After all, he is your brother. Your father is gone. In the family, he is the only man left. Our family's incense depends on him. If you don't love me, then love your father and spare Drew's life. From now on, I will never let him bother you again." Seeing her mother kneeling on the ground and mentioning her father made Maya unable to control herself. After all, no matter what she did, she was still her mother. In the end, Maya advised Tony to forgive Drew. Tony listened to his wife and agreed to forgive her. When Tony went to see Mr. Mason, he just smiled, as if he had guessed that Tony would come. After escaping the disaster, there was another thing that surprised Tony, which was that it was not by chance that he met Mrs. Lana that day. Mrs. Lana was indeed going to the market, when suddenly the spirit of a middle-aged man in a wheelchair flew over and trembled as he said to her, "Please, please, save me, Mrs." Lana had the ability to see that this person was not a living person. She thought someone must have been in trouble, so she followed the man's spirit until the man raised his hand and pointed towards Tony. Lana immediately saw a spirit following Tony. This spirit was a shaman she had raised, not a dead soul. The family was definitely in trouble. At the same time, the man's spirit had disappeared. Only then did Lana approach Tony and talk to him, and Tony took her home. Hearing about the spirit of the middle-aged man in a wheelchair, Maya suddenly had a premonition, so she asked Lana to describe his appearance. Then Maya knew that it was her father's spirit, knowing that his daughter was in trouble, so she found someone to save her. Everything gradually passed. Perhaps Mr. Mason had taken action, so Claire no longer came to find Maya. A few years later, one day, Maya heard that the house that the couple had built before, which Drew and Claire had occupied, suddenly caught fire. When the fire broke out, no one was home, so there were no casualties, but the house was completely burned down and could not be restored. The law of life is truly what goes around comes around. Drew and Claire's life became more and more miserable. They did not even have a decent roof, so they had to temporarily build some corrugated iron sheets to protect them from the rain and sun. Maya has always been a sensible daughter. A person's nature will never change. That's why, despite being treated badly, Maya still provided her mother with living expenses every month. Later, when Claire passed away, Maya was the one who worshipped the incense. In life, whether you have a son or a daughter is not important. The most important thing is filial piety. The story ends here.